If you're sick, stay home. Not if you're playing sick, but if you're sick, stay home. In your preparation areas, in your areas where you come in contact with human remains, practice the best protocols. And always create what we call a barrier between yourself and the deceased person. And remember again that that deceased person may be contagious. So here are some examples of barriers. And if you remember yesterday, the doctor said that barriers are the least effective form of protection. But let's look at some barriers. So masks, gloves, aprons, shoe covers, or shoes that you use especially for the preparation room. So, sterilize any room where you come in contact with human remains. If you're touching the remains with scissors, with scalpels, with anything, sterilize your instruments. Don't just use and put down, but use and sterilize. Look, I made Maureen nervous. She's sanitizing. Next, go back again. Find out what you can about the deceased. So at home, every decedent has a death certificate, but sometimes we don't get the death certificate until after we have the remains. So we don't know what the person died from. So find out what you can. Keep a pair of shoes just for the morgue, and consider having clothing that's just for your morgue area, or clothing that you can change when you go home. So don't work here and then carry your things home with you. Work here, use these clothes, leave them here. Take new clothes home. Consider when you are able to get the COVID shots. Has anybody here had the COVID shot? Yeah? Okay. So, do you have access to Moderna? The Moderna is 2 shots. Do you have your own brand of shots? These are U.S. shots. Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. Pfizer, okay. And so now there's also a booster shot available. So shot 1, shot 2, booster. Anybody had their boosters? Raise your hand. No? Me? I had my booster. Well, I was coming here. So there's a lot of problems in the U.S. with people who don't want to have shots. So it's getting tighter and tighter for people who don't have shots. So some restaurants in New York, you can't go to the restaurant if you don't have a shot. You can't go to the theater if you don't have a shot. It's just getting harder and harder to do anything without a shot. All of the teachers in the New York City school system have to have a shot. Some people just walked away from their job because they didn't want a shot. Me, I'm still living, it's okay. Okay, so boosters for people over 65, to those who are immunocompromised. But before I left, I saw that there were so many booster shots available, anyone can get one now. So I want to just look a little bit at what happened in the U.S. For us, the most intense period was from March until June of 2020. Cemeteries and crematories were very backed up. So I had a friend that drove 2 hours each way to pick the remains from me and take them to the crematory because my local crematory was shut down. Families couldn't go into the cemetery, and sometimes only 5 people could enter the funeral home. So what we had was a disruption in the way that people mourned, the way that people buried people. Everything was just turned on its head. It was a very difficult time for us. 2 minutes, just to look at the body, close the casket. We were limited to maybe 5 people at the funeral home for a while. And then only at some points, no one could go into the cemetery. Only the funeral director. And then the length of services was very condensed. So in most places now, funerals 1 hour. Viewing 1 hour. So 2 hours total. While money was made, a lot of money was lost. So we have a fund that people can use to prepay a funeral. But if you don't use the money for the funeral, it goes back to the state. So because a lot of people said, we won't go to the cemetery, we'll have a cremation instead, we won't buy this casket, we'll buy this casket. So over $13 million went back to the state of New Jersey in unused funds. So 1 billion penny shillings. So still a lot of churches have not opened. My church still is not open for any services. We're still meeting on Zoom. Oh, Zoom. We have screening for travel, for restaurants, for large gatherings. 2 years ago when I came here, I had a visa and that was it. Now I have to have a COVID test before I leave home. I have to have a COVID test to go back home. It's really difficult, and I think that it becomes expensive. I went to Tanzania before here, and the COVID test in Tanzania is $80 US. Yeah, gotta pay. So mask, everybody's wearing a mask, and some store shelves are empty. I went to buy a new car about 6 months ago, and they said, no new cars, sorry, because of the electronic pieces. Couldn't get them. And you'll still go into stores, and the store shelves are empty. Number one thing in U.S. during COVID that was sold, what was it?
Tissue.
Toilet paper, yes. People were going to the store and buying it like this. So when I was here 2 years ago, I showed you a lot of pictures of my family and around my funeral home. But I thought that I would show you a very interesting funeral I went to in South Dakota for a Native American. But first, these are my grandchildren. Aren't they cute? Yay! Look at my little band. Okay. Okay. So we went to the funeral of Galen Drapeau, a Native American chief. They had their viewing for 6 days in a gymnasium. And relatives were invited to come during those 6 days and spend the night in the gym with him. So this is where we were in South Dakota, over here. This is where I am in New Jersey. This was really my first trip during COVID, was to go to South Dakota. So this was in the gym at the high school. This is a teepee that they built for him, about, I think 12 feet tall. This is Galen here. You see the headdresses over here. And they erected the tent, but then they put his signs over it. So you see the elk here. You see another elk here. Elk and a moose. Eagle. The elk and a butterfly. There were tables in the gym. So people put the table up, and then they would put pictures up. These are photo albums of Galen during Galen's life. Young Galen here. And the Native American women cemetery. And I just thought this was really interesting. This was a baby stone. This you can't see too well, but has bingo over here. Oh, so we're done. Any questions? 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 Yes. So the question was, how do we protect the family? And that's a problem that I think we all have. I know I have that problem a lot. So I think the first thing that you can really do is just talk to the family and explain to them it's not for your best to touch the remains. I've done everything I can to sanitize the remains, but it's really best that you don't come in contact. The second thing that you can do maybe is to make barriers, to maybe put ropes in front of the casket so the family doesn't get too close. And then, I don't know from there, because it happens to me all the time, and I'll sit down and I'll say to the family, you know this person died from COVID? Yes. You know that this is contagious? Yes. I would ask you not to come in contact. Okay. And then on the day of the funeral, they rush in. Any other questions? Okay. I thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, a round of applause, please, to our Dr. Edith. What you really need to understand, America, they operate with time. They normally work within the time. And for those who are in Nairobi, last year, when you see Dominic Torino, even if you gave him 4 hours, 3 hours, but if you have spent much of the hour, he will just work within the time remaining. They work with time. And you can see the doctor has just worked within the time because she knows we are running the program. And let's try to be time conscious whenever we are trying to do anything. I think you have had the powerful presentation. That's how Dr. Edith normally does her presentation. It is always very powerful. Yes, I get the presentation, but I don't normally share the presentation because it makes people lazy. First of all, you have to tell me what do you want in that presentation. Don't just forward for me presentation. I won't do that. What I'll do, she talked about the body handling, about the cemetery, and look at the sections that you specifically want, then I know you are really interested to know. There's no point of sending presentation, which at the end of the day, you just want to show that you received the presentation. I'll share it after a month, and then contact me again that you really need, so that I know you are urgently needed that presentation. So please, let's try to take note. For FUSAK, what we normally do, we like, whenever we come to this kind of convention or conference, let's try to take notes. I really loved, you remember in Zimbabwe, how when they're doing presentation, you find how those people were grasping all this, they were too much intensity. And by asking the question, it doesn't mean that you are asking so that we know that you are present, but the way you are trying to put it, because with what you are doing with Cooper, actually you want to understand more also, which is very positive. I could have heard somebody talk about in our Kenyan delegates. I wish somebody asked about the issue of how do you handle unclaimed bodies, how are your funeral homes are being run, how do you do the prevention control. I expected so many questions coming from there because majority of you are the heads of the mortuaries and the funeral homes. But anyway, I'll share with you the presentation, but after you have put a request for that representation. That's how I share the presentation, so that I know actually he was concerned, he wanted to know what, but I don't normally share the presentation like that. You must request it, and then you must tell me which section are you interested in. Just copy and paste that section for your relevance. Maybe all these sections are not of importance to you, so that I know that actually you grab something. With those few remarks, we have come to the end of our first session of the conference. We say that today it's going to be very hectic. It's a long day because we have other things to do after tea break. As you can see the program, due to the tight schedule, and some are going to fly out today. We don't want to take much of our time, that's why we squeeze the program, so that after the break, we start the issuance of certificates, and also we have some special awards for people, and the awards are based on merit. There's a reason why it must be based on merit. It should be backed up, so it doesn't to be challenged. With that one, let's come to the end. We can go and have our tea break. Let's have it as quick as possible, because yesterday we did have a photo session. We skipped the photo session, but today we start have the photo session as the way the program runs. So that comes to the end, and thank you again, Dr. Edith, coming all the way. It's a support and it's an honor, and we are humbled by your presence here. It's not easy for you to book a flight and just come during this COVID pandemic and be with us and share with us. It shows how much risk you have taken to be with us here, and we don't take it for granted. Another round of applause for Dr. Edith. Now, that comes to the end of our first session. Let's take tea. When we come back, we now want to do the issuance of certificates, the awards. That's how the program goes, so that we also give other people time so that they may fly back home. For our delegates, I've received the report from the Premier Hospital, and they have said that they have sent the COVID test in your emails. So if you have not found one, especially for those people who are going today, if you have found one, it's going to bring the hard copies here in an hour's time. I think now it's going to be around 45 minutes. So at least we go back home safe, because it's better. We also see for the convenience. Kindly, if you didn't get, just tell me you didn't get your results, so that we see what you can tell him, and then give them hard copy. So we can pray for the tea break. Thank you very much for being with us today. Let's take our tea very fast, and then we come back. We run with the program. Thank you very much. As we are going for the tea break, you can just go for the tea break. I want to also thank Dr. Edith for bringing for us some materials and equipment here. These are journals, they are magazines. We normally don't issue to individuals. We don't want to be selfish because we don't want to be rigid. What we do, we keep it in our FUSAK library. You are free to come and read the journal. You can take a copy and gain the experience and gather the knowledge. We are happy through the National Treasurer. We acquired an office at Ruai. We have a premises. For those who are in WhatsApp, we have a premises at Ruai. Don't you think that's a blessing?
Yes.
It's a hard work that we have a place. So if you have time, even though we are working respectively, just call us, book an appointment. You shall get all the documents in our Ruai office. Thank you very much, Mr. Morioki, the National Treasurer. Please can you just wave? People see what you are doing in the industry. Yeah. Thank you very much. So with that few remarks, you can now pray for tea. Thank you.